And what we're going to talk about is what does scare the living IT out of me, and some of the thoughts that I've got with regards to where we're going. And what, first of all, keeps me up at night. Well, never mind on that. She told me not to put that one up. Biggest thing that bothers me is nobody gives an IT about a lot of what we're doing. They don't care. They don't understand how important it is and how long we've all been trying to get these things done, putting ideas forth and doing the warnings over the years. Many, many years ago, we were talking about the weaponization of the internet, and I remember very, very clearly talking with Congress back in 1991 and describing some of the issues that I was worried about coming down the line. And the congressman asked me, he says, Mr. Schwartau, do you really believe that the bad guys are ever going to use the internet for something evil? And we all know many of the struggles that we've had over the last 20 years getting people to pay attention, and it's always a surprise what the bad guys come up with. I remember back in 2001, or maybe it was 2000, that little Canadian kid, Mafia Boy, and that DDoS attack. And I remember I was at one of my clients, and it was like, wow, that's really evil, but wow, that was really cool at the same time. A great abuse of technology that we really didn't foresee, and became, and now certainly is, a very, very significant component in the arsenal of various of the attack methodologies that are being used, and especially being used in various types of APTs as well. So a lot of the things that were predicted 20 years ago are part of our daily life today, and unfortunately, we ignored a huge amount of it. No political comments here, but when you have a mass of lawyers running things that do not understand what's going on under the hood, you have a problem. Do you hire an electrician to fix your plumbing? Do you hire an IT guy to repair a carburetor for those of us that have old cars? Need some of the right people in the right places, and it's something that we collectively at the government level, and especially in this government body, we've had some trouble with. Having the right people with the right advice, doing the right things, and now we're 20 years behind. So some of the problems and things that really, really bother me, I'm going to weave in and out of. And again, what I'm saying up here, I do not want anybody to believe and accept everything I say. All I ask is that you consider it and discuss it amongst yourselves, amongst the community, amongst your colleagues here and around the country. And perhaps there is some value in some of the things that I'm looking over at the next 20 years for. We've done an awful itty job of doing defense. We have not done a great job. I've had to be very careful in some of the lettering on this presentation because I put it together about 7 this morning. And when we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expect the same results, we're kind of ending up where we are. And this is not a surprise to those of us that have strong engineering backgrounds, but it's sometimes a surprise to various types of policymakers that don't have the type of skills, that don't have the type of backgrounds that we have when it comes to making things work and being willing to make significant changes where they're really needed instead of trying to band-aid them with some new minor change to what's going on. The concept of fortress mentality still exists, and it astounds me that it really exists. We talk about perimeterization and firewalls 20 years ago with Cheswick Bellevin, and now we've talked about deperimeterization, and now the mobile thing, okay, that's the new endpoint, but the endpoint is really being redefined in that the carbon unit is the endpoint. The carbon unit is a significant component of what has to become this amorphous perimeter that is moving all around the world, connecting all of our networks together in ways that we do not even begin to understand, much less can we map. If you can't map it, how do you defend against it? And the concept of fortress mentality is one that even becomes less relevant. The more and more mobile we become and the more involved, the carbon unit becomes a very significant component of one of the layers of defense. I'm scared of China. Politically incorrect, hell yeah, but I'm calling it out for a couple reasons. They listened to us 20 years ago. They listened, their government listened. I know I've had a conversation with many of you that, remember September 8th, 1998, unrestricted war. And some people believe that they actually declared war on the United States that day, declaring that the civilian infrastructure and economy of the United States was a legitimate target of war. What did we do? Not much. China looks 50 years ahead. We look the next quarter ahead and pray for profits. We look for immediacy, a society of instant gratification. That is not going to work in the long term. Long-term views and a willingness to do things and operate in an asymmetrical manner is something that we have not yet had the will to do, and we'll talk more about that. 20 years ago at the Pentagon, we were talking about at what point does a cyber event, a cyber offensive action, become necessary to have a kinetic response? Now it's on the table 20 years later. This bothers me. And it bothers me that the wrong people are actually thinking about it. And these kinds of decisions of where do you do appropriate levels of escalation or inappropriate levels of escalation from cyber to kinetic, and how do you control these types of events from getting out of hand? The discussion, in my opinion, has not been open enough. 20 years ago, it was in some inner walls in the Pentagon, and now there's a couple of panels that have had some discussions, but it is not public to the degree that it should be, with the potential danger for escalation. The over-reliance upon technology. When I checked into the hotel at DEF CON, a couple hours in Vegas last week, a couple of hours later, they couldn't check in anybody because the registration computers came down. And for some reason, they had no pens, no pencils, and no manner at all to be able to register desks. So the line became 4.5 hours long. When we're looking at the systems we're building, whether they're mission critical or they're entertainment or any of the things that we're building, the amount of over-reliance that we are building into society, we can't live without it. I met an old friend from 22 years ago. She and I did a road trip. And we were talking earlier today. She said, how did we make phone calls? And she said, oh, that's right. We ended up in a really bad neighborhood in South Chicago, and you were trying to protect me as I got on a payphone looking for where we were going. Before fax machines. But now today we've got all of this stuff and we rely on it, and it becomes to the point we cannot live without it. How far can an organization go in a matter of time without the technology? How long can the individual live without the technology? But more importantly, when these systems are designed, is there a graceful means of degradation to provide some minimal amount of services in order to then be able to start building some level of reconstitution? And I argue, from what I've seen, we are living in a binary world. We're thinking in a binary world. It's on or it's off. There is nothing left in the middle. And I think that's wrong. I think that we really need to start looking at these systems as we escalate them, as we build new capabilities into them, with more of an analog mindset than we have. Cloudburst. A lot of debate about this. They say if you say cloud these days, you can raise $50 million out in San Francisco. So we're moving everything to the cloud, but it seems to me we're moving awful damn fast to a new model, a new architecture, and we haven't really properly solved some of the ones that we've already got, yet we're going to extend what we've got that's already broken into an entirely new architecture that we're only beginning to understand the implications of, yet we're back to that issue of over-reliance. We're going to over-rely upon the simplicity, the apparent simplicity of the cloud when it works. But what happens when the cloud or some portion of the cloud breaks? What are we going to do? I haven't seen enough work in this area yet to be satisfied or really convinced that this incredibly rapid migration into this space and these modalities is what we want to do. Makes me somewhat uncomfortable, and it's one of the things that scares the living IT out of me.